So I'll tell you, one of the things that I have learned in my very brief 27, going on 28 in January, may I add, years on this earth is this. When everybody is going one way, when everyone is viewing something the same way, or the majority of people seem to be viewing something the same way, particularly when it's reactionary off of emotion or something like that, it is wise at minimum to observe the other viewpoint in that discussion, debate, whatever it may be. Now, some people listen. Some people would just say, Justin, that makes you a contrarian. Fine, maybe it does. But I'll tell you something. If being a contrarian didn't lead me down the right path so often, I think perhaps by now I would have stopped doing it. But let me pull up the statistics real quick, because of course I bring this up because of the Anthony Richardson situation, right? As Colts fans, watching him get benched, now he's back, all this type of stuff. When the news broke of Anthony Richardson getting benched, I was in Chicago on a work trip. Perfect timing. And I asked you guys what you thought about it. Over half of you said that it was the wrong decision. Yesterday, I asked, having the information we have now, was benching Anthony Richardson a good move? It went from over half of you guys saying, no, it wasn't the right move, to damn near 90% of people saying it was the right move. Now, I bring that up because it lends itself to the point that I just made about being careful about following the herd when it comes to these types of discussions. You just got to zoom out and give these things time to marinate. I try to tell you guys this all the time. In fact, I kind of take pride in being the guy in Colts media who does that type of thing, who challenges you guys when you're all thinking one way, right? When you come with the zig, I come with the zigzag. That's just how I kind of, I messed it up. It's supposed to be, you came with the Chris, and I come with the crisscross, but whatever. It's all kind of the same thing, right? You get my point. It doesn't mean, by the way, you're always right to take the contrarian stance. By the way, it's not really my point. All I'm saying is that letting things take time before you come to a very, very strong opinion is just the diligent approach. That's all I'm trying to say. Now, when we talk about the Anthony Richardson situation, let's rewind a little bit and just ask ourselves, why were people saying this was a bad idea? Because it's very important to break this down so we can learn, perhaps, from the error of our ways here. Well, one, right? People were saying that by doing this, the Colts were throwing away their entire future, okay? And number two, people were saying that it was going to kill Anthony Richardson's confidence. Now, to make a claim like that, by the way, whether you realize it or not, what you're actually saying is that if you were in that situation, it would kill your confidence. So when you say something like that, you're really kind of revealing something about yourself. And maybe I'm the first one to ever bring that to you. Maybe not. I don't want to take for granted that you've had that thought before. I bring those things up because, let me ask, did either of those things happen as a result of the Colts benching Anthony Richardson? If the answer is no, then you're going to have to go back and admit, hey, maybe I was wrong, right? Because at the end of the day, listen, a question like, were the Colts right to bench Anthony Richardson? It's a 50-50, yes or no. So even if you come to the right answer for all of the wrong reasons, that's not exactly reliable moving forward, okay? Now, there's this other idea that, and I want to bring this up because the discussion I'm going to start today is perhaps a little bit speculative, perhaps a little bit, I don't know, but maybe you'll get my point, maybe you won't, we'll have to see. But there's this idea, right, and it goes in line with the benching of Anthony Richardson, that there's only been like X amount of, of the 66 quarterbacks drafted in the first round that got benched, only 23 of them started again, and only one of them won a playoff game or something like that. I forget exactly what it was, but here's my thing with statistics, because I've oftentimes said I'm not a stats guy, okay? You got to be careful with stats, because you can make statistics say just about anything you want if you approach them the right way, because that stat is one way. But if I were to say, Yeah, but if you took those quarterbacks, how many of them were drafted 4 and ran a 4.40 and all this type of stuff, you start to see that the statistic, it becomes a little bit more of an anomaly. And it's not to prove that he's going to be different than anyone else. All I'm saying is that if statistics were always right, well, then why don't you just take them, make bets on them every single time, and just quit your job, okay? At the end of the day, I just feel, this is my opinion on things, that you have to judge these types of things on a case by case basis. And you look at the benching in hindsight. And remember when guys like Kenny Moore and Julian Blackmon were in the locker room that long time ago, known as 2 weeks ago, right? When they were talking about guys not working as hard as they should. And there was kind of this implication that, hey, something here is amiss, okay? And it was convenient for a lot of us to say in the moment, particularly those of us who were foaming at the mouth over the entire situation. It was convenient to say that they were talking about guys like Shane Steichen and Joe Flacco, okay? But it seems to me right now that at minimum, right? At minimum, there's a case to be made that they were actually talking about Anthony Richardson, particularly when you take into account Shane Steichen's comments upon putting Anthony back in. And one of the things he made sure to clear up right away, because there was such a lack of clarity and transparency when talking about the benching of Anthony Richardson. And then when Steichen came back out, he said it's just about the process and being consistent in his preparation every week. Well, listen, in all fairness, what were you going to do after you benched him, completely dime him out and just tell that story? I mean, not for anything. That kind of would have been a pretty shady move by Shane Steichen, all things considered. But we're going to talk about the case that they were talking about Anthony Richardson, those guys, because I think they were. And we're going to talk about why I feel that way and why I feel the benching was actually what he needed, which, by the way, actually isn't much of a change from my opinion on it before it happened, or as it happened, may I add, my reaction to it happening, and what the expectations should be for him moving forward and how he could kind of keep the momentum he just got in the Jets game. But before we do, you know what it is. I got to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. As always, I ask anyone watching on YouTube and enjoying the show, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We're trying to get to 3,000. Huge milestone for us, by the way, on the YouTube channel. Audio listeners, leave a 5-star review. And of course, another ask, if that wasn't already enough, you guys know Colts fans, okay? Someone shared a comment, says, tell a friend about the show. Not for anything? Yes. If you know another Colts fan that would enjoy the content that I'm putting out over here, let them know, because you guys, I could sit here and talk into the microphone for years and years and years. At the end of the day, the most important people to this channel's growth, you guys on the other end watching and listening right now. If you enjoy it and you think someone might enjoy it as well, go ahead and share it with them. But let's kind of get back into the topic. And I kind of want to talk about it from the perspective of Anthony Richardson, right? Because I said, why do I think this was the right move? Okay. Well, if we're to try to psychoanalyze Anthony Richardson, let's just talk about the idea of confidence, okay? Because confidence, like being confident, there's a fine line, right? You want your quarterback to have an unshakable confidence to him, practically a delusional one, right? Have you ever heard this idea of having a short memory? Like a quarterback could throw 3 interceptions in a row, and he's supposed to go out the next drive and act like that never happened, okay? The fine line, though, is this. There's such a thing as being overconfident, and overconfidence is a massive problem, particularly if that overconfidence makes you feel like you can get away with things that other guys cannot get away with it. Now, in fairness to Anthony Richardson, with the God-given talent that he has, that has probably been the experience his entire life. And that's not to say that he has no work ethic or anything like that. But I am sure that for most of his football career, Anthony Richardson has been able to get away with talent and talent alone. Now, what we saw as this season started to unwind, because what we started to see was a regression out of Anthony Richardson, in my humble opinion. Like what we saw in the first 4 games of his rookie season, I thought was better than most of what we saw this season. And I think that was a product of that very thing I was just talking about, that overconfidence rearing its ugly head. For example, and I hate to just bring up old news, but the tap out, right? The infamous tap out from Anthony Richardson. That is something that a guy that's used to being viewed as special does, that's used to being viewed as different than everyone else. That's something that a guy like that does. And some breadcrumbs, when I talk about this idea of overconfidence, had kind of been dropped. Of course, hindsight is 2020, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I observed them at the time and called them out for what they were. I didn't. But if we look in hindsight, some breadcrumbs had been dropped prior to the tap out and the benching, that maybe we had a guy that wasn't quite aware of what he was getting himself into as a quarterback in this league. You talk about the most famous comment of them all, right? Which was him saying that playing in the NFL was easier than playing in college, which is absolutely absurd as a statement in of itself. Coming from a guy who never was good enough to play in college or the NFL, I can tell you that as someone who played in high school, right? That was enough right then and there, okay? So to make it like it's easier to play in the NFL is insane, okay? But then on top of that, I mean, think about some of the consistencies and the sentiments that he shared, right? This idea that nobody can do what he do. How many times have we heard him say something like that or a version of that? Or that he was kind of one of a kind and that, he has all of this talent. I mean, we just heard Anthony Richardson kind of talk about himself in some sense as if he was a finished product or as if that he was better than other people, not as much in the arrogant way. I guess there is no way to avoid the fact that it's arrogance, but does anyone, what am I trying to ask? Have you heard that? Like, am I the only one who now in hindsight says, wow, the amount of times I've heard Anthony Richardson say, man, I'm one of one, or nobody can do what I do, or, I'm a one of a kind quarterback. What felt like a very beautiful, confident thing at the time to say, in hindsight was like, dude, not for anything. Do you realize what this is that's going on right now? And that is why I feel the benching was a well-needed wake-up call for Anthony Richardson, which is part of the reason at the time I said the decision to bench Anthony Richardson was courageous by Shane Steichen. It should be applauded because he knew damn well that it was going to shake things up, not only in Colts Nation, but nationally, right? Like Shane Steichen has been around the league a while, okay? He's not an idiot, okay? But he did, in spite of conventional wisdom, what he thought was the best for Anthony's specific case and the specific things that he was doing or not doing, right? What did he view as the best thing for his development? He's thought, I assume at this point, that he needed a little bit of a reality check, right, buddy? It's a privilege to be starting. You don't just get to start as the quarterback for an NFL franchise. There's only 32 of those jobs on planet Earth, okay? It is a privilege to have that. And I think that's why Shane Steichen made the decision that he made. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that in 2 weeks, every concern that we had about Anthony Richardson leading up to that point has now been fixed. And all of a sudden, whatever poor habits he had going in are just completely eradicated after 2 weeks. I mean, that would kind of be foolish. But the question is, if the work was not being put in by Anthony Richardson, and that's what now we're led to believe, was it due to a lack of maturity? Or was it due to a lack of work ethic? And I'm personally willing to bet on a lack of maturity. Now, I'm not going to ignore, right? And this is why I say this. I'm not going to ignore everything that we've heard about Anthony Richardson from coaches and teammates leading up into this season, or whether it be the offseason, last season as a rookie, all of those things. All we've ever heard about Anthony Richardson from the moment he was drafted was the type of person he is, his character, right? And a lack of maturity cannot, and I cannot stress this point enough, cannot be confused with poor character. Those are not the same thing, okay? Now, you could have poor character and be not mature, right? But you can grow and mature much easier than you can fix fundamentally poor character. And that performance that we saw against the Jets, make no mistake about it, was a sign of strong character. That was a high leverage moment after facing adversity, and he responded in a big way. Like, he could have taken that as a moment to check out, but instead he took it in stride from the moment he was asked about it in the media. The way he handled that right then and there, I thought showed who he was as a person. And again, the way he performed in that game, that was a result of, yes, one, talent, but two, intangibles, things that you cannot teach. Because coming out and playing like that, albeit against the Jets, who in fairness have a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball, to come out and play like that after what he had been through, in fairness, it's not like he went through World War III, okay? He was benched for a couple weeks. I understand. But he could have very easily come out and wet the bed. He did the complete opposite. He had, in my opinion, the best game of his career. And listen, if that is not something to hang your hat on, I don't know what is, particularly as we go through the highs and lows and we kind of go through the emotions of every single week. We're going to look back at this moment and say, hold on, let's give this guy some time. As always, as I've said before, I'm willing to bet on talent plus character any day of the week. So now the question is, how can he keep that momentum? How is this going to, I don't know, what can we expect from him going forward? Well, number one, obviously you got to stay on the field, right? That just is what it is. Now, listen, I think this is who he is in terms of this idea that he views the corner. He views himself in a one-on-one matchup with a player in the secondary. He says, listen, there's not a corner in the world that is going to freaking tackle me and bring me down. Number one, he's wrong, okay? But listen, if that's what he needs to go out there and feel comfortable playing, okay, let's not strip that away from him, okay? But does it make me a little bit nervous? Absolutely it does. Of course it does. How can it not? That's the franchise quarterback. Everything that we have hinges on that. So, of course, keeping the momentum involves staying healthy. But two, continue to stay relaxed out there. I mean, he looked more poised, more confident, and at ease in this game than any game that I had ever seen him play up to this point, at least off the top of my head. I mean, that could be a recency bias in all fairness. But the point is that he looked very confident. He looked very calm. He looked very comfortable in that game. However it was, because just as much as that has to do with preparation and mentally, it has to do with what's going on up here, okay? And I'm not talking about from a smarts perspective. I'm talking about the battle against yourself, like the emotional battle, the mental battle, okay? Whatever he had to do going into that game to get into that headspace, he's got to keep doing that. Like, did he listen to music? What song was it? Did he meditate? Did he sit in the car by himself? What did he eat for breakfast? Was it cereal? Was it Raisin Bran? Well, keep eating Raisin Bran out of the same bowl with the same spoon with the same percent milk, right? Was it 2% whole milk? What the hell was going on, okay? Listen, it's somewhat tongue-in-cheek, okay? But you get my point. Whatever it was that he did going into that game, he's got to do a lot more of that, okay? Plain and simple, but, I mean, after 2 weeks of hell, we now go into what seems to be a turning point, or what we may look at as a turning point for Anthony Richardson. Obviously, time will tell, but that right there was us revisiting the decision to bench Anthony Richardson and revisiting it in hindsight. And I hate to say it, but perhaps this guy over here that took the stance that, hey, maybe that needed to happen, maybe he was right. And you were wrong. My name is Justin. This right here was the Ride the Bench podcast. Ride the Bench Colts podcast. Ride the Bench podcast. What a throwback that is. That was before it was Colts specific. As always, go Colts.